And I would like to go back to the matrix and to have you talk more about that. I know that you've done that this morning, but I think we can't really speak too much about it because we've lived in the split for so long that we don't even know there is a matrix.
No. Well, the word matrix comes from the word mother, from mater in Latin. And I think we can think of it in two ways. First of all, in relation to our own psyche, that it's the root or foundation out of which our consciousness has arisen. But secondly, we need to look at it in a much broader sense, in the sense of the whole species experience on Earth, not only our species, but all species. So this is the matrix out of which our consciousness has evolved. And if we look even beyond that, we look at the matrix of the cosmos from which the Earth has emerged. And we take our roots right back really to the beginning of cosmic life. So the whole of that is the matrix. And although I don't think Jung would have extended the concept of the unconscious to everything that I've just said, he certainly would have extended it to the species memory of the Earth, because he often used to say that we carry a 2 million year old man or woman within us. And that is the matrix of our present conscious mind.
So we really, each individual then carries all of the memory of our species.
Exactly.
And that really helps us to realize that we are profoundly related to every other person.
And every other species on the planet.
And every other species.
Yes.
So this is wonderful because we can say then that we really are related to the animals, that we could not have our consciousness if they did not have theirs.
Precisely. And even in our own brain system, we have 3 brain levels. The oldest is the reptilian level, and the second the mammalian, and the third is what we call neocortex. But the older the mammalian and the reptilian layer, this is where our instincts come from.
Yeah.
And they're not something that is sort of past and over or inferior or evil or bad or anything. They are the whole matrix out of which consciousness has evolved. We couldn't have had the consciousness we have now unless we had the vehicle which has been formed over millions of years on this planet of all the species of planetary life. So that is the real concept, I think, of the matrix.
It's, I think of a quotation from Brian Swimme when he says that we existed, consciousness had to exist from the beginning, because if you just leave hydrogen alone, it will produce a rose and a giraffe in the human mind.
Yes. Well, there you are. That's a lovely metaphor, really, for what I've just been saying. So we have to carry that in mind. We're moving into a totally different consciousness. We couldn't have had all this knowledge and this awareness unless we'd come through the scientific revolution that we've been through, unless we had all the knowledge of geology and botany and physics and everything that science has developed. We wouldn't have the ability to really look at where we've come from fully. In a different way from what the shamanic consciousness did, which was in direct communication with this. But we now have the whole sequence of evolution. We can look at it, we can understand it, and this gives us great depth, really, if we can relate to it.
Yes, so we really are saying something in praise of the development of the rational mind, that it's a lovely thing, a wonderful thing to be able to see our own history and our own interrelatedness.
Exactly, and to develop all the things we have. I mean, they're fascinating fields of knowledge now which have developed, which didn't exist to that extent before. They were more limited, more in depth, but not the huge range that we have.
And so now what we have to do is take all of these individual fields and make that circle from the old reptilian brain into the mammalian and the neocortical brain down into the heart, and create that circle of energy and flow, so that the heart is what relates all of the knowledge together, isn't it?
Well, the heart is really coming from this mammalian experience and the reptilian
makes
as well.
the circle,
Yeah, so we're talking now at different levels, but certainly to reconnect the mind with the heart is very important. And this, in a sense, is the autonomic nervous system that we carry within us, which is the old instinctive knowledge, and which is the thing which actually keeps our bodies going. It's the vehicle that we have.
It's absolutely brilliant.
And it's brilliant, and it manages all this below the level of consciousness. But I want to get back really to the effects of the split, because through the split, what happened was we began to think in ways and to be fixed in ways that were really quite detrimental to us. We began to split off body from mind, for instance, to think of body as something completely separate from mind. We began to split off feeling from thinking, and we began to split off the rational mind from the instinctive soul, the instinctual soul, so from the matrix of instinct, which is the soul. One can think of everything as the soul, which I will come to later on, but in more immediate sense, the mind has been disconnected from this deeper matrix of planetary soul, if you like, and beyond that, cosmic soul. So what happened was, because of that, when the scientific era began in the sort of 16th century, not to say that there wasn't a great deal of science before, but the science we know today seemed to have started with Galileo in the 16th century, and then later on with Newton. And somehow out of that, through Descartes, the influence of Descartes and the split between mind and what you call res extensa, which is matter, that this split came in and led to the belief that matter was dead, and that the observer, the scientific observer, was something absolutely separate from what he was observing, and he wasn't to let any emotional factor enter into his observation.
Really?
It was to be completely shut off, as it were, from what he was feeling and experiencing. He was only to observe what was happening in his particular field. So this came more and more into prominence, so that eventually we are now confronted or told to believe in a dead universe, which is without consciousness, without life. And this is simply ludicrous from the point of view of the ancient, say, pre-Socratic Greek philosophers, or the great Indian philosophers, going back at least 4,000 years. I mean, they would think they were completely mad in thinking in this way, because the universe was always conscious. And our consciousness comes from that.
Exactly, but today, people listening to you, the majority of them will think, well, there is no consciousness in the universe.
Yes.
It's only within the human head.
Exactly, and that's why science said that when we die, that's the end of us, because consciousness begins with the physical brain, and when the physical brain dies, that is the end of it. We die, and that's the end. So there's no such concept of the continuity of life or the recycling of life or anything like that. That's absolutely gone. But also what comes in is this fanatical determination that we should only believe in this, and that anything beyond the belief that physical life is the only reality is, as it were, irrational or non-rational. And that is a terrible thing to sort of impose on children's psyches as they're growing up, that there's nothing beyond the physical brain. They haven't understood that we had to evolve the physical organism as a vehicle for cosmic consciousness.
Exactly.
And it's taken so many millions of years to evolve this consciousness, the possibility really that we have now. And we're much, much further to go. But we got stuck because of this belief that there's nothing beyond matter.
Yes, it's really kind of a comical thing when you think of it from one perspective, is that how brilliant we were as creators, or that the divine matrix is, that it could gradually over millions of years produce or create a vehicle that actually could carry divine consciousness.
Yes, and an extraordinary vehicle. I mean, it's a miraculous vehicle.
Yes,
it really is. And this is what I hope one day children will be taught in school. So that's one strand that has come from this split between spirit and matter, or spirit and nature.
And I'd like to emphasize just a little bit more what you said about feeling and thinking. I mean, that has been so prevalent in our culture, and certainly in our generation, is that you cannot know a thing by feeling. You have to think, and you have to cut yourself off from the feeling.
Yes.
But this would be, the feeling is what connects us to that matrix as well.
Precisely.
And it's also what connects us to the heart.
And that is, well, the heart is the feeling.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's that connects us to the older brain system and to the whole matrix.
And then makes the whole, and that is our wholeness, is that when we connect to the heart, then we have connected to the reptilian brain, and everything can flow in its own fullness. As Jung says, we have to achieve our own wholeness, that nature or life does not seek perfection, but it seeks wholeness. And that would be what they're now calling the fifth brain component, would be the heart.
I think so, yes. It's so strange that they should have come in such a roundabout way to something that could have been understood much earlier.
If
they hadn't cut everything off into this and that.
Mm-hmm.
And of course women were associated with the non-rational, with emotionality, with feeling. Women carried men's soul for a very long time because men could not really connect with it without feeling that they were connecting with something inferior in a way.
That would actually destroy
to their
them.
feeling, which would be a threat to their supreme, as it were, control of the rational mind.
Yes.
So this is all mixed up together in many ways, and it comes out as, it came out as the oppression of women, it comes out in Islam as the fear of women, in fundamentalist Islam certainly, and even in fundamentalist Christianity. I noticed that President Carter, I don't know if you read about it.
Yes, I did. You sent it to me, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, well, he had to leave his Baptist church because they were teaching that women were created as a secondary creation in the myth of a fall of Adam and Eve, and therefore there couldn't be ministers and deacons in their church.
And this is a real regression because they were more advanced than that in the past, but since the more fundamentalist aspect of the Baptist took over, then that has come back. So what we really see is a greater repression in the Baptist church, because before women could be ministers, and it was much more open. But now they have started again. In fact, many missionaries came home because they could not be in the kinds of positions they had been in before.
Well, there you go. And that's one example. The other example of the effects of the split comes through to us in this, again, connected with the Christian fundamentalist church, that there is to be an end of time, a great battle at the end of time, called Battle of Armageddon, and that in this great battle the elect will be separated from the non-elect, and the elect will be taken by the rapture, what they call the rapture, to heaven, just in an instant, and the rest will be slaughtered or eliminated in some way, and that Christ will then come and reign over a purified earth, so to speak. This is all comes straight out of this split between the good and evil, and between spirit and nature. You come right the way through to this. And it's just unbelievable that people would accept the slaughter of millions of human beings in order that a few of the elect should be taken to heaven.
And that we would have 1,000 years of peace on the earth, that we would have to murder in order to get there.
Exactly. So slaughter is built into this, and it's partly to do with the Book of Revelation, which has again been taken literally. And so it's here we have the new kind of time. We don't have cyclical time anymore. We have time with a beginning and an end, and that's it. And then there's a new beginning after the end, but there isn't. We have to go through this terrible slaughter before that, and this, in a way, invites the very thing that most people would prefer not to think about. I mean, who wants to be slaughtered? Who wants to be divided into the sheep and the goats?
I'd like to return just for a while to scientific realism and looking at nature and all other aspects of life as object, and then beginning to think that the whole universe is dead. It's an object, it's dead. What are some of the effects of looking at the universe as dead matter?
Well, I think it's led to our abuse of nature, really thinking that we can master and control nature. This, I may say, goes back to Sumeria. It's very ancient. It's not only in the last 400 years. It goes into this whole origin of the split and everything. But certainly it led us to the idea that we were masters of the earth, that we were given dominion over the earth, and that therefore we could exploit the earth's resources for the benefit of our species alone, without thinking of the effect of our actions on all the other species, or indeed on the life of the earth itself. And we do, although both Newton and Galileo were deeply believing in God, once you begin to take spirit out of matter, as science did after the 16th century, then it doesn't matter what you do to matter.
That's right.
Matter, I may say, does come from the word mater, so it really is what you're doing to the mother. That's what the ancient people would have seen, and indigenous people see. The earth is the mother to them. So earth is no longer mother, it's just matter. And we can do what we want to this dead matter. We can even, if we want, we can bomb the moon if we choose. We can explore the universe in whatever way we want. But we could also even have war in space, so to speak. We could have missiles directed from space to particular parts of the Earth. I mean, all this is simply out of order from the point of view of the older vision, and it's come in with solar mythology. But then also what happens, particularly even now, scientists still talk of matter as something that we can really almost make nature our slave, like Francis Bacon said, that we can wrest nature's secrets from her. And this was even reflected. I was looking at a program in 2008 on the Hadron Collider in Geneva, which was just about to start up. And in fact, something went wrong and it couldn't start up. But the young scientist who was explaining what it was all about, he was a physicist called Brian Cox. I wrote his name down, and I wrote down what he actually said. And he said, "We are looking for ever more sophisticated methods of torturing nature." Can you believe it? And that really reflects the scientific mentality which regards matter as something that can be just treated in any way that we choose. We can smash it together to find whatever we want. We can collide atoms. And it really goes back also to the idea that we can split the atom in order to develop demonic weapons from that split, from that splitting. And this is really complete mistreatment of matter, which I think I've emphasized perhaps enough now. But it all comes from this original split of the conscious mind and the deeper matrix of our instinctual selves, which was the deeper matrix was connected to the whole of planetary life. So we've ruptured that connection. And in later discussions we'll have, I hope we can talk about the healing of this rupture.
Well, even in the treatment of animals, it wasn't that long ago that we actually realized or admitted that animals had feelings.
Or could feel.
Could feel pain, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Had the ability to feel. And that's amazing. But even in our time, animals are not treated well. I mean, they're killed in ways that are painful to them.
Yes, people. And they're treated very badly during their lives, in a way that doesn't consider them as having any feelings at all, or having any feelings of distress. That's coming in now with more organic methods of farming and all that kind of thing, but it's taken a long, long time, despite a great many people who have protested about the treatment of animals in scientific experiments on the one hand, and in the production of our food on the other.
That's right, and that is changing. There are now farms which treat them humanely, and of course now products will say that they have not been tested on animals. So we're at least beginning to move into a little bit more consciousness about the nature of animals and their ability to feel and to love. We certainly see that with dogs and cats.
Yes, and cats, and even horses, and even
horses,
cows.
Yes,
we do. And
yes.
also the capacity of animals to love each other. You have different species able to love each other, even rescue each other. There was a lovely story about dolphins rescuing humans, and even rescuing a stranded whale.
Yes.
So they're able themselves to relate to other species and to act on their behalf. And even elephants have done this, or cats have even had chickens, or dogs have had chickens to look after. I mean, they're amazing examples of this, which are rather fascinating. But we are observing more, we are making efforts, and this is something that needs to happen worldwide and is only happening in little tiny pockets at the moment.
And it's interesting when you say we are observing more. It's we have to recognize that it is our belief system that has kept us from seeing what we're looking at.
Absolutely, you put your finger on the spot there. Absolutely, yes. And I think that we probably covered enough of science for the moment as an effect of the split. And we can come on to the new kind of science, which is beginning to think in a different way. We'll come on to that later.
Yes,
perhaps.
we'll come back to that, because there really is, thankfully, much to say about the new science that is very hopeful.
Yeah.
But let's go to one of the other effects then of splitting, and that is the millennial expectations that we see in fundamentalism, the end of the world and the coming of the Redeemer.
Yeah, well, I think that the millennium expectation has existed right back from the time after Jesus, not during Jesus' lifetime, but there was some even in his lifetime, because he was looked upon by some people as the Redeemer for the Jewish people, briefly. But anyway, what happened was that this millennial expectation of the coming of my kingdom was taken literally, coming of Christ's kingdom, instead of realizing, as Jesus said, that the kingdom of God is spread upon the earth, but no man sees it. That's what he actually
yes, that's
says.
Beautiful.
But it was taken in a literal political or social sense, that this would be a new order, which would be ushered in at the end of a particular age and the beginning of a new age. And it was expected, put forward back and back until our time, when it's been really growing into a huge movement, expecting this great battle of Armageddon at the end of time, when the forces of light will defeat once and for all the forces of darkness.
So this is the ultimate war.
So this is the ultimate war, and this is the ultimate end of this whole solar age, where we have the split between spirit and nature, and the split between mind and instinct, and so on, and the great, the image or the mythology of the cosmic battle between good and evil, and the light and the dark. So here we have, what do we have? A horrific scenario at the end of time, of a great battle, of a tremendous slaughter, and a getting rid of all the elements which are deemed not to be belonging to the elect, that is to the Christian elect in this case.
Yes, no one else.
No one else. So nobody who is Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist or anything else will be part of this elect body. That in itself is something so utterly against the teaching of Jesus that it makes the mind boggle. He always said, love your enemies.
Exactly. I think you had said earlier that Jesus really was someone who wanted to bring back the lunar understanding and experience of our relatedness to the entire cosmos, so that there would not be that desire to destroy the other, because we would then be destroying ourselves. So exactly. Jesus really was a reflection of that wholeness that we lost in the lunar age.
Yes, he was, and he was a true shaman, because that was really, he was a healer, much more even than a teacher. I mean, he healed the sick, and he told people what they needed to do to be healed. He spoke of compassion, he spoke of love, he spoke of light, he spoke of the turning the other cheek when we were attacked.
Yes, certainly not murdering.
Certainly not murdering your brother, however much you thought that he was beneath or beyond you. So this whole millennial belief system goes utterly against the teaching of Christ, and it's just incredible that Christians should actually fall for it and take it on board as something that they have to think about and belong to. And the belief that you have to either convert people to belief in Christianity in order to save their souls is again utterly ludicrous and against the teaching of Jesus. And Jesus said, really, he gave in some of the Gnostic teaching, certainly, he actually said, in relation to nature, he said, lift a stone, and there you will find me. Cleave a piece of wood, and there I am. Or slightly, possibly the other way round. But in any way, what that indicates is that he saw divinity within everything.
Everything,
and that's what he was trying. That's what he was trying to bring back into his culture. And I think a few people have picked this up. I'm certainly not the only one, but it needs to be, I think, really developed so that we get beyond this ridiculous framework of thinking that the end of the world is coming and that there's going to be this terrific battle. If anything, the battle is within ourselves, freeing ourselves from this great hold of this belief system.
That's right, but once again it's projected outward on the other. And I think we were going to mention Tim LaHaye and let's see, there's another one. Who's the other? Tim LaHaye, I had it. Jerry Jenkins. Who wrote the Left Behind series. And in that, of course, millions of copies of that book have been sold. Yeah. And that is definitely about the end of time, the end of linear time. You said we have a beginning and an end in this mythology. And that at the end, when Jesus returns, Jesus, who is the uniter and the force of love and connectedness, but they have the images of Jesus returning, and when he returns, the closer he gets to the earth, the more murder will take place. The Jews will die, an excruciating death, the Muslims will die, and all others who are not Christians.
Really charming scenario.
It's a charm. Well, it's a very pathological
It is pathological.
image.
Yes, it is absolutely.
And it's not recognized at that. Millions of Christians have bought that book. And it's not only that book, but recently there have been many reports about a form of Christianity or an interpretation of Christianity that developed in the 30s and that many politicians belong to now. And that their position is that Christianity has been misunderstood, that it really doesn't matter the elect, what they do. The important thing is that they have power. Power is everything. And so it doesn't have anything to do with living from the heart of feeling and love and connectedness.
It has nothing whatsoever to do with the teaching of Jesus.
Has
Absolutely
nothing to do with the teachings of Jesus, and yet it's very powerful now. And it has tremendous influence in Congress, and those congressmen have tremendous influence in the world with people, sometimes murderous heads of state. And so it isn't just a negligible group of people. It's a very powerful group of people in the United States.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it shows the pathology of what happens when the split widens so much that the conscious mind is actually taken over or possessed by the unconscious, by the instinct. So you have all the power of the instinct taking over the conscious mind, and the conscious mind says, this is fine, I need this power, I'll use this power to do whatever I want. And it doesn't realize it's possessed by the instinct. And that's what happens when the split has widened so much that there's absolutely no awareness of what Jung called the shadow. And that the shadow is really the power of the instinct harnessed to the aims of the ego, when the ego has no knowledge of what's happening within the psyche.
Okay, that's very good, because instinct is a wonderful thing, but then you're explaining how it can be very dangerous.
It can be extremely dangerous.
Just go through that again, because
well,
right
through history, you can see the inflation of heroes like, take Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Louis XIV, Napoleon. They all suffered from this complex of grandiosity, really, in which they were going to conquer great territories. Now you have the same thing, which is what you've just been saying, this thing of a need for power. We must be able to exercise whatever power we want to get whatever aim we see as necessary in the world, to overthrow whatever regimes we want to overthrow, etc., etc. And it's a pathology that runs right the way through the solar era, and it can be traced in all these leaders, these military leaders, but also in leaders who've been spiritual teachers, but who've taught that one particular religion is better than another, or that one sort of, as it were, one approach to religion is better than another, and that any other approach, being inferior or contrary to God's will, must be eliminated. So therefore you had the Crusades wanting to wipe out the Muslims who were in the Holy Land. They had been there from the beginning, really, I mean, apart from the Jewish people, but they were there in the Middle Ages, and suddenly this great mob came in from Europe and slaughtered as many as they could and tried to seize what they call the holy areas back for Christianity. All this was absolutely unnecessary, and it came from a totally misguided concept of what God wanted. Because of course the problem is, when you have a pathology like this, you bring in God. You say, this is God's will. This is what God wants. This is what's telling me to do. That's another thing.
And this is
they
truly
may even hear the voice. This is a huge inflation.
Well, that's really, I think, important, because to understand is that certainly the reptilian brain, the instincts can connect us to our deepest nature. They certainly are part of our deepest nature, but they must be used by the other components of the brain in a way that is compassionate. And that's why we need the connection to feeling and to the heart. But when we look around our world today, and we see so many leaders who are obviously extraordinarily pathological, because they do have this drive for power, much more so than many, many people. So we might ask the question, why do they always get power? Is it because they want it more than anyone else and they know how to get it?
Well, I think that there was a very wise saying that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That was said by Lord Acton some time ago. But this is what happens when you become governor of an enormous country, say like the United States or China or whatever, or Russia. or anywhere really, where you have supreme power to do what you want in government, and your executive, not the executive, but the controlling functions are weakened, like, say, Congress or Parliament,
yes,
are weakened, and you have more and more power concentrated in the executive, well, then you're in a very dangerous situation. And I think the American Constitution was set up to safeguard
yes,
against that particular thing. But we saw in the Bush administration how that constitutional ground, as it were, was overridden by the survival instincts which come in when it says we're being attacked, we're threatened, we've got to take action, preemptive action if necessary. That is the instinct speaking, it's the survival instinct. And that overrides everything that we've achieved in these last 5,000, 10,000 years in the way of distancing ourselves from the ability of the instinct to take us over. So, as you say, the instinct has two aspects. It can go, it's Janus faced, it can go either way depending on the attitude of the conscious ego or the conscious mind. So that's why Jung put such emphasis on becoming aware of our shadow and of how we project onto other people and name them as demonic or evil or whatever we want to call them, or as dangerous. And that is the survival instinct speaking and taking over the whole psyche and the whole culture, because a kind of hysteria then grips the whole culture, and people say we have to arm, we have to do this, we have to have nuclear weapons, we have to do whatever we're doing in order to protect ourselves. And they forget that they're part of the whole, that one nation or one part of the human family is part of the whole thing, that we're not just one little bit, that we are connected to the whole.
No, that by destroying other, we're destroying
We're
ourselves
actually destroying
and our
ourselves.
planet.
Exactly.
But we could say, in fact, it's pretty clear after your discussion that we are in sort of the ultimate in phases of the solar mythology, that by destroying other, we have come so far in that that intention to destroy the other, that we're at the point that we can destroy all our whole species and perhaps the planet. So we're really at that ultimate end. And of course, we're talking more and more about Armageddon and the end of the world. But there is the belief that if you elect, we'll survive. But we really need to be aware that we could destroy all of our species and much of the life on the earth with the weapons that we've now
developed. And with our whole way of thinking. We have to change our whole way of thinking. And this is a huge, perhaps the biggest evolutionary change that we've ever made, I think, in a way. Because we now have the power to act in a godlike way. We can destroy what God has created. And we can destroy our whole civilization. We can wipe out our species and do terrible damage to the earth. So we have a choice now. And I think that this as you say, is the choice at the end of the solar era.
Yes.
But the choice is not between Armageddon or no Armageddon. It's between whether we change our whole way of thinking and behaving, which is the true change that's coming. You could say it's the end of a certain phase of time, if you like, historical time, and the beginning of a new phase. But it's certainly not to do with a great battle, except within ourselves. The battle is within ourselves to become aware of the shadow. And this is why Jung's work, I think, is so important, because people have no awareness of what can take them over, no awareness of how survival instincts are immensely powerful and can override the values that have been developed so with such difficulty, the values of justice, compassion and relationship, which are there in our institutions but are not strong enough to override these survival instincts when they get going.
So Armageddon certainly is a projection of our own shadow.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we need to bring Armageddon back into ourselves.
Back inside and heal the big split within our own nature.
Yes, and instead
so
of
we don't project anymore outside.
Exactly, and instead of having a great war even within, we're going to try to look lovingly at that shadow side of ourselves and understand where it came from.
With
and that's
compassion.
exactly why we're doing this today, is that we need to understand, how did we arrive at this fear and this great shadow and this great belief that we must kill off the other into an ultimate battle of Armageddon in which the entire world is destroyed,
and that we have
except a few.
And that we have to conquer and that we have to win. And the whole idea of victory over the darkness is something we have to let go, really. But the darkness is, as I say, as you say, within ourselves, within our beliefs.
Is there any other aspect of an ultimate war or Armageddon-like scenario that you know of?
Yes, I think that we find the same idea in fundamentalist Islam, in the Wahhabi sect, where really, according to Osama bin Laden, the ideology there is really an Islamic takeover of the whole world. Again, we have the idea of oneness, but taken in a literal way.
Well, that's an important point.
Yeah, that's important. And that oneness is going to be imposed on the world by force, which obviously would have to be by force because nobody's going to agree with it willingly.
Mm-hmm.
And that this would be the will of God. And then at last the reign of God, which would also, they believe that Jesus will return to be a partner, as it were, in this whole thing. And a new era will begin, which will be the reign of God, if you like, and which will be a theocracy, a worldwide theocracy, in which obviously the leaders of Islam would have total control over vast populations. I mean, this is just, again, ludicrous, a ludicrous concept, and yet people buy into it because they're so poorly informed as to where the origin of their thinking comes from that they take it as gospel truth. And therefore they think that they are becoming soldiers of Muhammad, just the way the Christians were soldiers of Christ. And so we get the same scenario of great violence, war, annihilation of millions of people probably, and then a new order which is imposed, and a new order reigns on earth. So I think that those are the two different scenarios, both in Islam and in Christianity, in fundamentalist Christianity and fundamentalist Islam, that we find. Thank God there are many elements in both religions that don't play into these beliefs. But nevertheless, they're very dangerous because they have the whole power of the instinct behind them.
Mm-hmm.
They're driven by the will to power. They're driven by that Nietzschean understanding of the will to power,
mm-hmm.
where that becomes the sole ruling arbiter, really, of their behavior.
Mm-hmm. And then so much of the political situation has intensified it. I mean, sometimes they have very legitimate complaints of injustice, and that spurs them on even more intensely to fight
to
against
overthrow
the enemy, to overthrow the enemy. So we really have two of the major three world religions in the West working for an ultimate end of the species,
yes.
You might say.
Yes, which is just unbelievable, really, and it all comes from this belief of the cosmic battle between good and
mm-hmm.
evil, which originated with Persian Zoroastrianism, and also with the myths that I talked about earlier, the Numer Elish and things. So it's just come down over thousands of years, entering into all the theologies of these three different religions, and inculcating the beliefs in millions and millions of people over generations that this was the right way to think. And with that, one has to say, came the struggle for justice. First of all, justice on behalf of a small part of the population, then justice of people generally, and the idea of democracy, that the will of the people should have a say in government, and that governments were the servants of the people. This has all come in gradually, but we haven't gone nearly far enough, and we
mm-hmm.
have to really confront this mythology of the end times and a new order in the form of this very violent scenario.
Mm-hmm. And what makes it, of course, so dangerous is that it is within a mythology of God's will.
Exactly.
So that it absolutely paralyzes consciousness.
Yes.
That one will simply believe a thing and do it because it's God's will.
Because it's God's will, because we're told that it's God's will. But it really depotentizes the individual who is no longer able to think for himself.
That's
he has
right.
to believe what he's told to believe.
Mm-hmm.
Because he belongs to the group that believes, he has to go along with it. But he's no longer capable of finding his divinity within himself. The whole thing is projected outward onto Allah or onto God. And that is, he's held within that very confined belief, thinking that he's doing God's will.
Exactly, and this, one just simply has to say it, is that such religions actually stall, inhibit the development of consciousness and the development of love and connectedness and relationship is that it is the religion that stops evolution.
Well, because the power principle is built into these religions, and the control is built into it, the idea that they have to have control and that the people who belong to their particular religion have to obey, just like people have to obey the Catholic Church in not using contraception, say, in the Philippines, where there's a terrible, or South America, where there's a terrible problem of overpopulation. They still obey because they're frightened that if they don't, it's a sin. And that is very deeply imprinted. For nearly 2,000 years it's been imprinted. If you don't obey the church, you're in a state of sin. So perhaps, I think we've talked enough about that, really, to make the point, and I'm sure that...
Okay, well, you wanted to go to...
I want to go to the whole, the whole phenomenon of materialism. But that really follows quite logically, because if you take away spirit from nature and from matter, if you take away the survival of the soul after death, if you take away any meaning in life and any consciousness in the universe, you're only left with matter, which you want to naturally get as much as you possibly can of, in order to compensate you for this huge loss of spirit. So spirit is projected onto matter, and the need for material goods, for things, for power, for success, for fame, for celebrity, etc. All these are compensations for the huge absence of meaning in our culture.
That's a good point.
Deeper meaning. And materialism, again, comes from the word matter, or mother. So really people are running after the mother in consuming all these goods. And they're running after that matrix, which has been taken away from them, that connection with the matrix. It doesn't have to be that you're swallowed up by the matrix, but in fact people are swallowed up because they're swallowed up by this greed and this need, which takes them over, and they're not happy unless they're shopping for whatever it may be, the next TV or the next car or the next set of designer clothes, whatever it may be. That becomes the most important thing in their life. It's that gives their life meaning.
So it is a substitute for
It's a substitute for the matrix, for the deeper, for the connection with the deeper matrix.
Yes, and which gives then meaning to life and allows the growth of the mind, evolution.
Well, it would do if we could reconnect. We'll come back to that later, perhaps. So I think that that's the position of the modern psyche, really, knowing nothing of the depths at all, identifying totally with the conscious mind as being the only organ of consciousness, believing that we are in a dead universe and that we can manipulate nature and matter to our own advantage, quite regardless of the effects on other species or on the fabric of the earth. And this is really tragic, except that it does, because we've got to the furthest point, I think, that we can go without truly endangering ourselves. I think that it gives us the opportunity of reining back, looking at what we're doing, understanding this whole historical process, disconnecting from our beliefs where we're possessed by them, understanding that one can be possessed by the will to power, and do we want to go on in that way? We have the choice. You know, I think that's very important.
So we're really at a crossroads, and we have to, in the next session, talk about the healing and what are our options at this particular time in our own history as a species.
Yes, and it's a huge opportunity.
It is,
and
we have to look at it in that way.
Blessing too, that we've come to this point and that we're capable, because we have the intellect now, we have the understanding, we have the capacity to reconnect in a conscious way, no longer perhaps as in the lunar era as a more unconscious way.
That's right, but consciously.
But consciously, and bringing together all the fragmented parts of the psyche and of our own being, reconnecting mind with heart, thinking with feeling, and learning to see a totally different worldview. We need to bring into being a different worldview, which is based on this new understanding and no longer based on the idea of power over things or people.
And that's why it's so important to understand the history of our psychic development.
I think so. I think it's absolutely vitally important, and I can't think why it isn't taught in all the schools.
But it isn't known by the teachers.
So to sort of, without sounding in the least bit derogatory towards other people, because one can see that they're caught in this great dream, as it were, without knowing that they are living in a dream of disconnection and lack of meaning. And really, there's a great sadness, and I think that's where a lot of depression comes from.
Absolutely.
In our culture. The sadness for something that's missing and a longing for what is missing, but not knowing what it is.
And I think that longing may be just the energy that can lead us toward our work in healing and understanding. The longing is so great.
Yes, I think so.